Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're delighted that you're joining us for this conversation focusing on careers in international law. I know we'll have a couple of more people joining us, but we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Joanne Burnett. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Campus to Career Conference. And as you've no doubt seen through emails and campus docket announcements and posters and other programs, we are in sort of the middle point of Campus to Career. We have about this week and next week full of programs. And this part of the conference is really focusing on career communities. And today, of course, you're here to talk more and learn more from people who are in the international law career community. And I'm so glad that you're here. I encourage you to look at the other programs we have coming up as well. You can see those on the campus docket and in our program guide. And I'll share the links to that in the chat. This group of panelists is such a great sample of some of the wonderful opportunities that are available. And I encourage you to ask questions. We'll be monitoring the chat for those questions, and we'll also have time at the end for you to ask questions as well. I will be sharing the links to the panelist bios as well in the chat, so you'll have an opportunity to learn a little bit more about their background and careers and experiences. And before I turn it over to our moderator, Jessica Dworkin, I want to give a special shout out to the sponsors of Campus to Career. We were so delighted to have 3 firms sponsor us this year in Campus to Career, and we welcome back Baker McKenzie as one of our sponsors. They were our global sponsor. We also welcome Baker McKenzie is our innovation sponsor, Holland & Knight is our global sponsor, and Quarles & Brady is our professionalism sponsor. And we really would not be able to do this without the help of our community. And so I'm grateful for them. So now, without further ado, I will turn it over to Jessica Dworkin to lead our conversation. Thank you all for being here.
Well, thank you all for joining, as Joanne said, and thank you, Joanne and the rest of the career development team who has helped assemble this wonderful panel. What I would love to do is let our panelists briefly introduce themselves. I know that their bios are in the chat and you'll have the opportunity to read them in greater detail, but I'm going to ask each of our panelists, and we'll do maybe alphabetical order by first name to keep it simple, to give a brief introduction with maybe 1 or 2 career highlights about the international law practice that you have that you want to highlight for our participants. So Adriana, we'll start with you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Adriana Dennis, and I kind of landed on this career path randomly, I think. When I started at Stetson, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be an attorney. And as I went through Stetson, I really enjoyed anything that had to do with children's rights. So I really thought that that was going to be my trajectory. So while I was at Stetson, I did a lot of like guardian ad litem, state court internships with DCF. But immigration is something that always interested me because I'm an immigrant myself. My family went through the process. And it was actually when I was studying for the bar that I saw a job posting at Gulf Coast Legal Services to do their children's immigration project. And that's when I thought that was great because it was very hands-on with my clients. I didn't feel that a lot of the other positions and other places would give me that opportunity. So I applied for that, and I ran the children's project from 2008 to 2014 at Gulf Coast Legal Services, focusing on the unaccompanied minors that back then wasn't as much known, but I think nowadays you'll see a lot of it in the news and, you know, the kids in the cages and things like that. So that was my kind of specialty and kind of still is till this day. So here I am.
Alex?
Sounds good. Well, thanks everybody for having me. My name is Alex Ferris. You know, I kind of bounced around a little bit. I originally specifically went to Stetson to study international law and kind of went down that rabbit hole and sort of found myself taking an immigration course. And I grew up overseas and my mother's an immigrant. So it just sort of connected, just sort of made sense. And obviously I took as many of Professor Nagel's courses as I could when I was at Stetson. And obviously enjoyed that. And now I work at a law firm and I practice employment-based immigration. I've kind of handled various different immigration cases over the years, but right now it's mostly employment-based. So companies basically sponsoring, you know, foreign nationals for non-immigrant visas and green cards.
Thank you. Bansari?
Hi, everyone. I'm Binsari Amin, and I'm an attorney at Baker McKenzie in Tampa. And I came to Stetson already kind of knowing what I was interested in, especially in international law, just the global scale of the work that I could be doing. And I took courses with Professor Nagel as well, who really shaped a lot of, what I wanted out of my career. And at Baker McKenzie, I do a lot of different type of transactional corporate work. So ranging from transfer pricing to regulatory compliance, some intellectual property. I've really gotten to do work that I didn't even imagine when I was in law school, and it's been fantastic.
Wonderful. And Professor Nagel.
So you want me to go back all the way to when I was really born? So a lot of you know I'm an immigrant, and I used to work in Colombia, South America, with a corporation. I did some international business transactions work, and I did a lot of criminal law. So when I got to the States and I went back to school, I always did a lot of comparative law, and I was expert witness in different cases. So I just been working on the criminal side, the business side. So that's pretty much my career path in international law.
Thank you all for that. I think that's really helpful. What I'd love to talk about next is maybe some of the most important skills that you use in your international practice. And if they weren't skills that were sort of things you started out in life with, things that came naturally, if there are particular ways you found to really polish those skills or to learn those skills during your law school career, that would be wonderful. So if I can switch it up a little bit, can we start with Binsari this time? I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
No, totally great. I think the thing about international law that's so fantastic is you're working way outside of yourself, and not even just like an immediate team, but you're working across regions and time zones, and with people of different backgrounds and cultures. They all approach business differently. And I think one of the biggest things is like honing your communication skills and your ability to collaborate, organize, and coordinate, not just for yourself and your own work, but with people across regions. Like the great thing about Baker is I'm constantly doing work with people in other countries, and it's fantastic because it really gives you a chance to see how they approach the same types of work through their own culture, their own business lens. And you have to be able to coordinate all of those things pretty efficiently in order to be able to get such complex work done for big clients globally. And so that's something that I've definitely had to work on, because it's one thing to be able to communicate well for yourself, but another to do it on such a big scale. And I think that the work I've done has really given me a chance to become better at that, which has been fantastic. Again, it's also given me a lot of patience. You've got to be really flexible, working with people across different time zones and with many different priorities on their own plates. And I love that it just feels bigger than me in anything I do.
Fantastic. Let's go to Professor Nagel.
I'm so glad I'm behind Binsari, because that's precisely one of the things that it was just so crucial to me. And I'm just going to use two examples. When I work in Microsoft, and when I've been working with the International Bar Association on different projects. And why it goes with Binsari is because when you are working in the international arena, you're working, yes, with people from different cultures, people from different legal systems, and individuals who have an accent that sometimes it's difficult to understand. But because you are all working on the same issue, it forces you to abandon that comfort zone of what you are used to listening to certain accents. The time zone change is crucial, which means that the law students need to learn how to adapt to not only the getting up at 2 a.m. to be able to participate on a negotiation or be able to participate on a conference, but also the amount of work and reading that you have to do to be able to be prepared for that negotiation or for that specific work that you're doing. So those are some things that I learned when I was working that now I try to transplant into my class activities for the students.
Wonderful. And Adriana?
I think, and this is not something I think law school teaches, but just being organized and having attention to detail, at least for immigration law, is something that is invaluable, because a lot of, if you look at these forms that we're doing for clients, a lot of the information is very technical, like their date of birth and things like that, and like when they entered and you really have to be good about keeping track of these dates for your clients, because they become imperative as to their deadlines of when they can apply for immigration relief. And once that deadline is passed, there's nothing I can do to bring that deadline back. I can't, tell a judge, oh, I'm so sorry, judge, I didn't realize my client's son was turning 21 years old. It's done. There's nothing I can do. So it's a lot riding on these attention to details, and you kind of learn what works for you to keep organized and to keep those details in mind, and have various cross calendars going at the same time, so you don't miss these deadlines. And in immigration law, I think it's very different, because a lot of the relief that we seek for our clients is done in written format. So your writing really has to be very, very well, because you're not going to get the chance to explain to a judge any discrepancies of what you maybe meant to say, or clarify things. So you have to make sure your writing is something you really work on. And a lot of the people that we go in front of aren't immigration judges, or they're just immigration officers. And sometimes that's very frustrating. And trying to teach the law at the same time as being there for your client is something that the patience, I think, really comes in with these officers. A lot of them have a lot of power in their hands, but they're not attorneys, they're not judges. And it's kind of frustrating at the same time. So patience is definitely key, I think, to practicing immigration law.
Wonderful. And Alex?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everybody. Ultimately communication is incredibly important, right? Research and writing and being able to explain complex legal topics in kind of layman's terms. So a lot of the times I have to explain, a complex immigration process and just how to really kind of whittle it down, boil it down to, just language that everybody understands. Obviously, my individuals tend to be from all over the world, right? So we're dealing with HR managers, and the employees tend to be, from India or wherever else. So, patience is also incredibly important. And, it's kind of, ultimately compassion, right? I think it's important for us to have sort of compassion for our clients, really listen to our clients. In my case, our clients tend to be corporations and businesses. So, there's also financial aspects and implications to what we do, and obviously, deadlines and being able to adapt to pressure and stress, and actually in my case now, all of a sudden it's management is more important, right? So that's something I didn't really learn too much at Stetson, but it's something that I'm starting to develop now. So I have a group of paralegals, so that's a very different sort of career path than I originally had. So maintaining flexibility and being able to sort of grow, also utilizing technology is something that I've had to kind of adapt to as a result of COVID. So, I don't think there's a one size fits all necessarily. It's just kind of an all of the above. Yeah, and it's a journey that obviously continues. So it's been great.
Fantastic. So it sounds like I'm hearing skills of, I try to jot them down, cultural competency, flexibility, communication skills, being detail oriented, and organized, and then having patience and compassion. Then there were some overlap, I think, between your answers, which is excellent because I think it shows how important those skills are, regardless of the specific type of international practice you're doing. Alex, you touched on a little bit the need to learn some technology skills and perhaps to pivot with COVID. So I'd like to start with you next. And I'd love to hear about kind of how your practice has been impacted by COVID, what's been different, maybe if there's been some positive changes that you've seen as a result. We'd love to hear about that. And then we'll kind of go around the circle again.
Sure. So, COVID obviously was incredibly detrimental in a lot of different ways, but from a business perspective, we didn't see much of a dip. Actually, we saw the opposite. We actually got much more busy. Obviously, people were getting stuck at the border. There were travel issues. We had to obviously advise, our corporate clients on numerous immigration matters that were changing quite rapidly with travel restrictions. But in terms of technology, as funny as it is, we utilize Microsoft Teams a lot in terms of the collaboration software, and that's been very effective, especially when everybody was working from home. We had to figure out how to coordinate with paralegals and how to make sure that cases kept on moving despite the fact that we weren't physically here. And ultimately, immigration is kind of in the Stone Age as it relates to everything is still paper filings. So to figure out how to do that and continue to collaborate was challenging, but actually I think it's made us stronger as a practice ultimately. But there was a lot of kind of work from home, and we all came back, and then we went back home at some point. But just sort of utilizing collaboration software, we utilize kind of case management tools. We use this software called VisaTrax. So it kind of forced us to sort of modernize our practice in a way, which was kind of interesting.
Great. Bansari, do you want to answer kind of how COVID's impacted what you've been doing?
Yeah, so in line with what Alex said, utilizing technology has definitely been big. Baker's been able to do that successfully. I think we were, as a global firm, you've already have to be able to use technology to your advantage. And we were able to sort of scale that for when we all had to work remotely. And that was in line with what a lot of our clients were doing, which was fantastic because for them, it showed that we were able to keep up with their needs, even as, things were changing. And we saw certain industries were impacted more than others, like travel was something that came to a halt for certain companies. And they kind of saw that shift moving into e-commerce and online businesses. So there were a lot that were starting to think about transitioning, and COVID maybe sped it up for them. So, regulatory surveys for moving businesses online in all 50 states, keeping things consistent, moving forward for customers. And internet-based work was big too for brand management, such as trademarks. There were a lot of more traditional companies that realized that they could use COVID to their advantage and kind of move certain aspects of their business online. And I think that's been great overall because it sort of streamlines a lot of the work, and we were able to keep up with that. So that was definitely a positive.
Wonderful. Professor Nagel?
Yeah, and I'm just going to address the negative aspect of what happened with COVID. Yeah, technology was awesome, was great for those who had the means to be able to implement technology. And in my practice in the area of human rights, it was very detrimental because you had a lot of women and children that didn't have proper Wi-Fi. So trying to reach these individuals that were being victimized during the confinement of COVID was very difficult and very frustrating. So what we were trying to do was just being in contact with the NGOs that had some type of good technology and trying to come up with ways for them to be able to reach out to these individuals that didn't have the Wi-Fi or the technology. So that was a little bit frustrating, but again, exposed one of the gaps in the global world in which we are. And that's, again, one of the roles of international lawyers. We need to try to find some type of uniformity in the way that we communicate with each other so that we can have methods that are more inclusive and we are not discriminating against few.
An important point to add. And Adriana, would you like to add to this?
I was going to say exactly what Professor Nagel said. A lot of my clients are not technology like savvy. They don't use email. So it was very difficult in the beginning they really, and a lot of clients, and I think it's because there's a lot of fraud when it comes to immigration practices, right? There's a lot of people passing themselves off as attorneys and things like that. So a lot of clients really want to see you and hug you and shake your hand and make sure that you exist and that you're not going to just run off with their money. So it was a learning process with the clients in the beginning that were like, it's okay, I'll just see you when you start seeing people in person. And it's like, no, you have a deadline. We can't do that. We really need to do this now. So that was very difficult. But I think as clients started to have to use Zoom for everything, right, for their kids' schools and things like that, they also started learning that this is okay. This is now the system. But it is very difficult. I do a lot of victims of domestic violence cases, a lot of unaccompanied minor cases. And no matter how much I harp that they have to be alone when I talk to them in the room alone, it's hard to gauge, especially if they don't have video. I have to take their word for it. So we have to come up with like safe words, like for my kids, we come up with a phrase or something that I say to make sure that they're alone so that when I talk to them, I know that they're safe, because there is a lot of very personal questions that I'm asking my clients. And I just want to make sure that their abuser is not sitting there listening to everything. So it's become a big challenge. I agree with Professor Nagel when it comes to the victim cases. And we're still trying to gauge what's the best way to handle it. Unfortunately, I do feel like it's a detriment, but I also feel that it has helped a lot and has taught me as an attorney that I don't have to see every client in person, because I did, for every meeting and everything like that. And for some of our clients, it's very difficult, having to get a ride from Plant City to St. Pete is not cheap. So I think it's been a learning process. And I think every day we learn more and more as to how we can be more effective in this new world, because I do think it's kind of here to stay, at least part-time, unfortunately.
Thank you all for sharing that. I'm wondering if you think back to sort of how you approach the world, or what your perceptions were as a student, what you wish you would have known, and sort of similarly, what advice you would give to the current students or the incoming students that are joining us today. Who would like to start? I think I've picked on all of you. Anybody want to start? Professor Nagel, are you willing to go first?
Okay, I'll go first.
Thanks.
I wish I had known that international law is just an umbrella for so many fields. There are just so many things that you can do under this big umbrella called international law. So the students need to realize, first of all, that they need to learn domestic law first. And like the students, those that were students at some point said, I didn't know what I was going to do. You just never know, but you need to learn the domestic law first. And domestic law has international law. For example, you're working in family law, and you're going to say, I don't need international law because I'm going to be working on family law. Well, maybe you are going to have a client that is going through divorce, and a child is taken outside the country, and all of a sudden you have something that is child kidnapping. There is an Interpol red notice against your client, and you have no idea what just happened. Or you decide to go only on criminal law, and we have the supremacy clause, the treaties that the United States has passed, they become the law of the land, and then you forget that the client is entitled to know that the consul of his country is supposed to be informed as to the detention of the individual, and all of a sudden it's like, I didn't take international law, oops, what do I do? So it is important for the students to see that international law is not something foreign. It's something that is applicable today to pretty much every single field in which they think they are going to be practicing law. So.
Excellent. Who else would like to jump in?
Yeah, I'll add to that. I was going to say, it's incredibly layered. And just as Professor Nagel said, it's really important to build your foundation first. You don't have to know exactly what you want to do, but the principles that you learn are so important, and you're going to find yourself using them no matter what type of law you end up in. And so I think it's really important to build that foundation and keep an open mind. International law is not just something that, only comes up at certain times or only impacts certain types of work. You're using those principles, right now. And I think I wish I had known that there were so many types of work. I mean, I've been able to see that in my work, but when I started working, there were so many fields that I didn't even, you don't think about, and you don't know because it's so expansive. So again, that's not something that you have to know when you're even in law school, but just building that foundation is important first.
Excellent. Alex, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I agree with everybody, and I love the analogy of the umbrella. I think that that's, absolutely fantastic. And, although I don't necessarily practice international law day to day, I truly don't, but certain aspects do absolutely creep in. But I think it's also a really great point that when you're in law school, take a variety of courses, obviously domestic law, more than likely that's going to be kind of mainly what you're going to end up doing. To a large extent, I found myself practicing family law, although I had aspirations to practice immigration law and international law. So you just never know necessarily where you're going to end up. One thing that I wish I did is I wish I took trial law, because I ended up in family law court all the time. So you really do not know where you're going to end up. And I think just a little bit of variety, I think, is going to suit you well, ultimately. I kind of went in sort of hyper focused on one thing and ended up in a completely different direction. So hindsight's always 20/20, but had I taken a trial ad course, I think I would have been in a slightly better position out of law school. Everything worked out, but yeah, variety I think is absolutely incredibly important.
That's a last word on this one, Adriana.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what everybody said is exactly, true. You need to have the foundations. I think what law school teaches you the best is to be able to issue spot, right? So you're like, wait, there's something, I'm adopting out a child that's not from the US. There has to be something else, right? So that's part of what I do as an immigration attorney. I do a lot of trainings to other attorneys and to law enforcement and DCF and things like that, that you can't just adopt out a child and then they magically have citizenship and things like that, that you kind of learn as you go. But yes, international law is something that touches upon everything. When I'm doing my immigration cases, I have the Hague Convention to deal with, when I'm trying to serve parents outside of the country. So it really does touch upon every aspect of your practice, regardless of what you do. If you're a criminal attorney and you have an immigrant client, you need to make sure that that client understands that it might be okay for you to plead that down for their charges here, but it might be better for immigration law to keep the felony and not plead down to the misdemeanor, believe it or not. So you need to be able to spot that and maybe not deal with it yourself, but know who to call, right? Even I'm an immigration attorney. When it comes to what we call crimmigration, I don't touch that. I let the experts handle it. So you need to be able to also make connections while you're in law school. And when I was in law school, I took opportunity of every internship I could, because I really am a hands-on learner. And I think that also is when you start learning what it is that you like to do, because sometimes you're like, oh, I'm going to like I really thought I was going to work at DCF, but then I realized that they don't really talk to a lot of the kids, and I didn't want to do that. And I would have never known unless I took those internships. So I think also the basics, but also I think take advantage of the internships that Stetson offers because they're totally amazing. And I think the connections you make there, I'm still really good friends with the judges that I interned with. And it's really helped my practice. So I would definitely take advantage of that as well.
So I'd love to invite our audience to enter questions into the chat at this time. So if you have questions for the panel, please go ahead and type them into the chat window and we will answer as many questions as we possibly can. And while folks are doing that, I have kind of one last question for the panel that I'd like to ask. And it's sort of a two-part question you can choose. I'm really curious in hearing either what the most surprising aspect or the most rewarding aspect of your international practice has been. So if you guys would like to talk about that, and then we're getting questions in the chat and we'll make sure we address those as well. Does anybody want to jump at that one? Most rewarding or most surprising aspect of your practice?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. Most rewarding, ultimately as an immigration attorney, we're helping families, we're helping generations of people. So to ultimately have a really difficult case approved, somebody incredibly well deserving, that never gets old. And ultimately, I kind of went into law to ultimately help and make a difference as kind of, woo-woo as that sounds, but that is really the best aspect of this job. A paycheck is fantastic, but, ultimately to help folks and really, quote unquote, make a difference is, that's really the reason why I'm here. So.
Who else wants to jump in? Yeah.
I'll jump in. I think working for a global corporate firm, one of the most rewarding things is just how many connections you can make. I didn't start by, being really comfortable with reaching out to people that were doing the type of work I was interested in, but over time you get comfortable working with different teams on different projects, and it's just good to be able to pick someone's brain. When I was at Stetson, Professor Nagel was a big resource, and we had a lot of conversations because I felt like I could turn to her to really figure out what I wanted to do. And I tried to take that in my work as well. Most people will say yes. They'll try and find the time to connect with you, and you don't need to be mentored, consistently. Even if it's just one conversation in the moment that you need them, it's really helpful. And another thing that I really love is the pro bono work that I've been able to do. Still really interested in human rights work, and Baker has a big pro bono practice. So take advantage of those opportunities as well, because you get to work on really, really interesting human rights cases. I have an interest in internet work. So, working with nonprofits that try to bring internet access to people and places that don't have that sort of access, especially in terms of like internet shutdowns and democracy. And so it's been really eye-opening for me.
Adriana or Professor Nagel, do you guys want to jump in? If not, it's okay.
Adriana, you want to go?
You can go ahead.
Professor Nagel is deferring. So Adriana, I think you're up if you'd like to chime in.
I think I agree with everything that's been said. And I really agree with Alex. It never gets old when you have an immigration case approved for a very deserving client. But my favorite is reunifying clients. A lot of my clients have been in the US for, 20 plus years and are finally getting to see the children that they left when they, were babies, which is also a very interesting dynamic, because now they have to learn how to be a family again, really. And that causes a lot of conflict sometimes within the family. So I think also, and being an attorney, I feel sometimes I'm part case manager. So you need to be able to guide clients, not only through their legal cases, but sometimes, to find them therapy when it's necessary. When we have victims of trafficking, they really need access to services. And so I always say, I feel like I have a team when it comes to our nonprofits that we work with, and being able to guide clients through everything. And when it comes to my unaccompanied minors, it really is everything. I am like the one person that they call for everything. So it's very, very rewarding. It's very, very frustrating practicing immigration law, because I feel like it's unlike any other kind of law, in that everything can change with just a policy memo. It's not like the law changed. We actually just got the regulations for the law that changed in 2008 this year. So that's 14 years waiting for the regulations as to how to practice special immigrant juvenile cases. Immigration is very frustrating like that. You'll read the law and you'll think it's okay. And then you're like, wait, this is not how we do things. No, it was changed. Oh, okay. Where are the regs? Oh no, we're still waiting on them. So it's something, but it's very, very rewarding. I can't imagine myself practicing anything else after practicing immigration law.
So I will add to the wonderful things that everyone has said. I think I would say just now being an expert witness on different cases, and that will go to a lot of students who speak another language or know another legal system, because when you are an expert witness, what you're doing is trying to explain to the jury or to the judge something that happened in another country, in another legal system, and then trying to explain that in terms that they can understand in the US legal system. And that goes international criminal cases that I've been an expert witness in. And I may say one of the cases we won just because where a comma was located in one of the laws. So that really emphasizes the importance of knowing punctuation and the words that are included in certain statutes, or being an expert witness also in a lot of asylum cases. That is also very, very rewarding.
Well, I want to thank you all for what you've contributed thus far. We do have a number of questions that have come in from the audience. So I'm going to turn it over to Joanne, who's offered to some of those questions are publicly in the chat. Some have come in privately. And so Joanne's going to share the questions with you all for answers. And I am going to put myself on mute, but thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. So the first question that we have is, this question is about any advice for current students who are interested in international law but don't know specifically what direction they would like to go. What might be some good ways during law school to help sort this out? Any advice on courses, volunteer opportunities, internships, or people to connect to?
Well, for immigration law, Gulf Coast Legal Services, I think still has the immigration clinic. And I used to, help with that, and it's an amazing clinic. You're hands-on working on immigration cases, and you very quickly learn whether you are okay with that kind of practice. It is also a very specific kind of immigration practice. So we have had students that say, I can't handle this. I'm going to go do business immigration law because I can't handle, the victims of domestic violence and the victims of trafficking, and that's fine. But it's good, I think until you start doing some hands-on, working on cases, or whether it's volunteer, or you get a summer position with a law firm. That's the best way, I think personally, that you're really going to learn what you like. You can read everything you want to read, but until you start doing it, I think it's a different ball game.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Again, just sort of variety, right? You don't have to know exactly what you're going to do now. It's okay for you to go down different paths and explore different opportunities and options. I mean, I went to law school for international law. Frankly, immigration law was something that only came later. I ended up in an immigration law class with Jennifer Coburn. She turned out to be my boss now. So you never know where life is going to take you. But I would say, if it's a course that you're interested in, take it. Take international business, take human trafficking, and see what you really like. You don't also have to, actually pick them out. Life can take you in lots of different directions. It's okay.
Alex, I think your audio is coming in and out a little bit. I just wanted to let you know. I think most of us caught that, but just so you know, it's coming in and out. Okay, anyone else
I'll
want
add
to chime
to
in?
that.
Yes, please, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, you don't need to worry if you don't know exactly what you want to do. I have too many interests, I think sometimes. It's hard to narrow down because there's just so much fantastic work out there. When I was in law school, I tried to find different ways to get involved. So I personally reached out to the international section of the Florida Bar and wanted to see if they had any opportunities. I was just thinking a pro bono, any work that I could get my hands on. At the time, I was also interested in environmental law. And it turns out they had an opening to help edit, it was kind of like a guide for Florida attorneys on international law. And I got to help an attorney write and edit a section on international environmental law. And that was really interesting because that's not something I would have come across without doing a little bit of research and just kind of using the resources you can, reaching out to people. The worst they'll do is say no, or maybe you'll have to try again at another time. But that was a great way to get involved in international law generally, as well as environmental law, and also hone my legal writing and editing skills.
Any other thoughts on that question? I think there's lots of good resources that our campus provides to get exposure and the opportunity to do internships, externships, or look for summer jobs. I think those are great resources with, turning to the Office of Career and Professional Development, turning to the Office of Clinical and Experiential Education as well. And then, of course, we have our faculty experts as well, who are great resources. The next question involves just a little bit more specifically about opportunities for summer associate positions in the international law realm. So we talked sort of about this being sort of an umbrella, right? So if the position isn't specifically for, international law clerk, what sort of experiences might be really valuable? What sort of practice areas might you think about in order to get skills that would be valuable in your specific spaces?
I'll go. So I didn't clerk for an international firm. I actually clerked for a boutique IP firm. Intellectual property was my sort of main interest coming into law school. But when I was there, a lot of the work was Florida-based and national, but they did have some international clients. And so I very upfront said that I wanted to do the international work that would come in if they ever had the opportunities. And so I think no matter the environment you're in, if you can kind of ask for those opportunities and say, look, I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to put in a little extra work because this is something that I want to gain experience in. It wasn't an international firm, but even that little bit of international IP work that I got to do just sort of solidified in another way that I wanted the scope of my work out of law school to be international.
Other thoughts on that question?
Yeah, Kathy can go, but I also have some thoughts. Okay, so a lot of the students think that they need to pretty much intern in international law firms, or that they need to take specific courses. My suggestion is international law course should be required, period, because we have the law of the land is treaties that the United States has entered into. They are the law of the land. So a lot of people are not exposed to that. With regards to the practice, like Pansari said, you need to be amenable to whatever comes to you. They are sections and aspects that intermingle with international law. And it just, this international practice, you need to think about, okay, I'm going to work for the US attorneys. Do they have an international section? Well, you know, there is something called extradition, and extradition has to do with international law. They are aspects in every, just like I said, the umbrella, in every single practice, you're going to find an international aspect. Unless you decide, and you are so lucky to work for an international law firm that I don't know which one it is, that specializes only in arguing in the international tribunals, which it doesn't exist. I have one of my best friends from here. He's a partner in a law firm that his practice is white collar crime. He has been arguing in The Hague, in the International Tribunal. Why? Because a lot of those principles and knowledge that he's had, he applies to that. So that is very important to take into consideration.
Dean Martin.
I'm going to go down as the great unmuted. I think Professor Nagel said it better than I ever possibly could, but it's unlikely that you're going to find a summer associate position that is strictly an internationally focused position. But most of the largest law firms have practice sections that do have some international clients, and you need to think carefully about the geography that you want to work in. If you're determined to work in international law, some of the firms have their international client practices in other cities like New York or Los Angeles or Chicago or Miami. So it's a treasure hunt for the most part, but you do have to become expert in some areas, or at least have some experience in some areas of domestic law before you're going to get those assignments. And a lot of firms just don't, they just don't assign new associates to those kinds of projects. I apologize for interrupting, but I wanted to make that point.
Thank you so much. I wanted to also ask Jessica to come back on to talk about some of the other opportunities that we might have on campus to get additional exposure to international law.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk really briefly about some study abroad opportunities. I think particularly for the students that are on campus now, we're basically restarting, right, after a 2-year hiatus because of COVID. And so you might not be as familiar with what those opportunities are. I think our panelists probably remember some of these opportunities from when they were students. So we typically offer 4 different study abroad programs every summer. We would normally offer a program in Cape Town, South Africa. We're not offering that one this year yet because of COVID, but it's normally out there. We also normally offer Granada, Spain in the summer. That one is not running as well this summer, but there are 2 programs that are running this summer that I want to highlight. They do still have a little bit of space available, but they're also just out there generally as another way to take exceptionally interesting international law classes, and often classes that would not normally be taught during our year and or are taught by faculty not only from Stetson but from other universities as well. So you can get exposed to different scholars and different perspectives in terms of international law. So this year we're going to be running a 4-week program in The Hague in the Netherlands in July. Professor Nagel is going to be teaching for us this summer on a really fascinating class on the rights of women internationally. Is that correct, Professor Nagel? I think I got that right.
Yeah, exploitation, subjugation, yeah.
Yep, which looks amazing. And then she'll be with 3 other faculty who will all be teaching there in the summer. And then we also offer a program in Oxford, which has some of those trial advocacy skills that Alex talked about. It's really an experiential program that happens over 2 weeks in Oxford. We also typically offer programs in December and January, so right after Christmas, the last week of December into the first week of January. We have a program in the Cayman Islands, particularly of interest if you're interested in tax or financial law. It'll deal with some international aspects of that. And then we normally have programs that run over spring break, which we expect to be back for 2023. So there are opportunities to take not only the regular classes that we offer on campus, but also other classes and often in other settings. So for example, The Hague, where Professor Nagel is going to be, we're working right now on scheduling visits to a couple of the international tribunals. So the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice. It's an opportunity to see things that, you know, we love St. Petersburg. It's absolutely beautiful here, but the ICJ is not here, right? So if you want to actually see and experience some of those things in person, these are great opportunities. So thank you, Joanne, for letting me highlight those.
Thank you, Jessica. And fun fact, Adri and I studied abroad together when we were law students, and it was transformative. And of course, built a bond that lasted well over a decade. So wonderful opportunities if you do have the opportunity to take advantage of those. So there's a couple more questions I want to ask in the chat. I'm going to kind of combine them because I think there's a similar kind of tone or theme. So one very specifically, where are there any certifications, and I'll kind of separate that one real quick. Any specific certifications that you might recommend that have helped advance your practice? And then we'll go to the next one. Anything come up for either anyone? Okay. Perfect. Then the second question is, and we talked about this in terms of, you know, Adri, you talked about sort of the heaviness of some of your cases, right? And you and Alex touched on that too. And certainly Professor Nagel, I know that has impacted your world as well. These can be really traumatic cases. You're dealing with people who've had trauma. And there's a phenomenon called secondary trauma that lawyers don't talk about that often. But it can happen in immigration cases. It can happen in many other practice areas as well. And I think it is something to be mindful of. How do you basically turn it off? How do you separate the practice? How do you maintain your wellness when you're dealing with such heavy cases? And the other thing that I'll kind of add in there for discussion is, how does this work when, you know, like, how do you create this balance that we all kind of strive, this work-life balance when the work is heavy and you're dealing with lots of time zones? So I'll kind of just throw that out there and encourage anyone to sort of chime in on that.
Happy to jump in there. And yeah, you know, and to your point, you know, secondary trauma is very real. You know, I've worked on asylum cases, and unfortunately I've seen some videos that you cannot unsee. You know, and self-care ultimately is incredibly important. I'm lucky to be married to a therapist, so that helps. But
that's a nice bonus, Alex.
Yeah.
That's a nice bonus.
Yes, she's a social worker, so that's very helpful. But you know, ultimately, you know, self-care, you've got to take care of yourself. You've got to, you know, take time off. You know, even the folks that work under me, you know, if anybody ever needs, you know, basically a mental health day, you know, we cannot overlook how important that stuff is. And I think in the legal community, you know, for a while it's sort of frowned upon to take care of yourself, but I think that ultimately it is incredibly important, because if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to be able to be a good advocate for your clients, and ultimately you could be doing them a disservice. So, you know, ultimately, and also kind of know your own boundaries, right? You might not be the same as somebody else that can handle those really difficult, gut-wrenching cases. You know, only you will ultimately know that. So, you know, obviously it's important to kind of step outside of your comfort zone, but also know your limits, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think pretty much what Alex said. You have to find something to kind of to not to make you forget, but maybe something else to concentrate on. I mean, if you know me, my thing is dogs. I have fostered over 43 dogs in the last 10 years, and it's just, a lot of people are like, oh my God, how do you do it? But it's just my obsession that just makes me focus on something else and not my clients and their cases. And you also have to, like Alex said, know your limits and set those boundaries, because clients will push and they will expect you to be available all the time. And you know, you quickly learn what emergencies are, and they're very few in immigration law. When a client needs to contact you at midnight on a Saturday or things like that. So you have to set those boundaries so that you're not going to be able to keep helping if you're not there 100%. And sometimes it's very difficult because you feel that all your clients have is you. But you have to kind of take that step back. I'm also my boyfriend of 12 years is also a social worker. He's a high school social worker, so which has his own stressors, but I think we kind of force each other to take a step back and take those mental health days and do things that are fun, to just forget for a little bit as to what you've just read in a police report that will traumatize you for the rest of your life. You just kind of have to do those things to keep your mind at peace, I think.
And we have time for maybe one more, please.
Sorry. So I just wanted to jump in on this because I think it's really important to emphasize that secondary trauma is indeed real, and it's okay to be dealing with that, right? So I've done volunteer work. I've gone down to the border and worked at some of the same things it sounds like Adriana has, where you have children in cages, and it's really difficult. And I can tell you, when I came home from that, I had nightmares for weeks because of the stories I had been told and the people that I had been trying to help. And so I think it's really important to recognize that that's a real phenomenon and to really focus on self-care, regardless of the type of practice that you go into. It's sort of like your oxygen mask. You can't help others if you yourself are not well, and there's no shame in that, right? So I have a gratitude journal that I keep. I've been really bad the last week. I need to get back to it, but I keep a gratitude journal. I try to keep my perspective. I try to exercise. I try to do things that keep myself healthy. And I would really encourage, particularly young attorneys, when there's a lot of time pressure and it feels really stressful, to make that a priority regardless of your practice. I cannot emphasize enough how important that is. And so I just wanted to make sure that I'd shared, I do these things, and I think a lot of people do these things, and there's no shame behind doing them. They're things we all need to embrace.
Professor Nagel.
I just wanted to add something important, because not everyone is lucky like Alex and Adriana to have the echo, but it's going to be crucial for the young lawyers to have a group support. And just when you graduate from law school, you tend to think, I have to know it all. I cannot show my weakness. But the reality is, one thing is the law, the way the law is being written, and something very different and many times detached and gross and awful when you get to see how it is applied. So yes, I mean, I'm a runner, and that sometimes helps, but I'm running with the thoughts and the images and the problem in my head. So having that support group, having those even just 2 or 3 people that you can talk to and that they can listen to you, and sometimes just someone to listen to you will be enough. That is going to be crucial.
Well, I know we're running out of time. I just want to thank again each and every one of you for being here. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your insight and experiences with our students. We're grateful for all of you, and I hope that we'll see the rest of you in additional Campus to Career programs to get additional insight on different career paths. So thank you so much for being here, and have a wonderful afternoon.